Hello, my good friends. Welcome to a brand new section. In this section, we are going to be building a project that is going to be a little bit more involved. And in this project, we are truly going to see the powers of Nuxt.js. In the last section, we used Nuxt.js to build our baby generator application, but I bet you didn't really see if it was worth it. Did we really get a lot out of it? I think the only thing that we really got out of it is the auto importation of the components. Now, I only did that just so we can get a view refresher and a little bit of an introduction to Nuxt, but that wasn't a great example of showing you the true powers of Nuxt over just pure Vue development. So this project is going to show you how much easier it's going to be to build certain applications with Nuxt.js over Vue. So let me just quickly go ahead and demo this project, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that we are going to learn. So right over here, we have this landing page. We're going to be building an application called Restaurantly, something like that. And we have this nav bar, so it seems as though we have navigation. So once we go over here, we click on View Top Restaurants, we get redirected to another page, and this is going to be the /restaurants path. And it's just going to show us the top 50 ranking restaurants across the world. So you can see here, one's McDonald's, two Starbucks, Taco Bell, blah, 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 etc. You guys get the point. But even better, what we can do if we wanted to is actually click on a particular restaurant. So I can click on Wendy's, for example, and then I get some more information about Wendy's. So I get this picture just showing Wendy's off. We get the title over here. We get their annual revenue, which is $4 billion, and how many stores they have. And then we have some additional information here that is just very simply some lorem ipsum. We can also scroll down and we see this banner that says, hey, you know what? If you want a restaurant guide, go ahead and click buy now. Now this button doesn't do anything. I just have this here for the purpose of showing you a Nuxt feature, but it's there, so understand that. We also have navigation right over here, so we can go ahead and click on home. You can see here, maybe very faintly, that the color changes as soon as you navigate from tab to tab. So you can see home here, and then over here you can see that this one's a little bit whiter. The restaurant tab's a little bit wider, and when you click on home, this is a little bit wider as well. So this is what we are going to be building, and we are going to be learning some of the really important features of Nuxt.js. And if you try to develop this with Vue, you probably imagine that this is going to be relatively difficult. However, with Nuxt, we're going to get a lot of additional features. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that we are going to be learning in this project. So the first thing, and you probably imagine this, we're going to be learning how we can create pages in our web application. In the last project, we only had a baby generator, and that was just one very simple page. But now, as you can see, we have multiple pages across our app. So we're going to figure out how we can deal with pages inside of Nuxt.js. Another thing that we're going to talk about is layout. So the layout is the way we can lay out our page, lay out our HTML structure. So this might be a little bit confusing to explain right now, so we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to that point. Then we're going to talk about metadata. So how can we apply certain metadata to any single page? Again, if you're confused about this, you'll understand it once we get to that lecture. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is outside style sheets. So we're going to do some internal CSS styling, but I'm also going to start relying on some outside style sheets. Particularly, we're going to be using Bootstrap. So we're going to talk about how we can inject that style into our Nuxt application. So I hope that gets you guys excited. It does get me excited, and I'll see you guys in future lectures. Alright everybody, let's go ahead and get started with working on our restaurant application. Now for the first few videos, we're just going to work on the landing page. So we have the nav bar, as well as the restaurant.ly header, as well as that link that's going to navigate us to the top 50 restaurants page. So in order to do this, of course, we need to go ahead and create a brand new Nuxt application. To save some time, I already did this. But just as a refresher, if you are unfamiliar, you're going to navigate into whatever directory you want to create this application in. And then you're going to do npx nuxi, npx nuxi, and then init, and then you're going to give your application a name. I called it O2 Top Restaurants. You can call it whatever it is that you want. Now, once you create this, what you want to do is you want to navigate into that application. So you can go over here and do cd, and then whatever you called it. I'm going to call it my name, for instance. And then once you navigate into it, you just do an npm install. And then open it up into your favorite text editor, and then just do an npm run dev to have it running on your local machine. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And we're going to continuously do this so you will get used to it. Now, once you have that, you're going to have this, default application up and running. We can go ahead and remove this Nuxt welcome so we can just have no boilerplate right away. Now, I mentioned that for this application, we are going to do some custom styling, but I don't want to start focusing on styling too much. So what I want to do is I want to use an external library that is going to provide us with a bunch of styles that correspond to some custom classes. And the most popular one by far, and probably the one that you are also familiar with, is Bootstrap. So this is what we're going to be using. So Bootstrap is a library or a popular framework that is going to allow us to style our applications relatively quickly. So there's a bunch of UI elements, a bunch of layout elements that we can utilize. So for example, over here, we have a bunch of, we have a container class that's going to give us some styling to create a container. Now, how are we going to get this right over here, Bootstrap, connected to our Nuxt application? Well, the way to do it, and let me zoom in here once more, is to very simply add this link tag right over here into your HTML elements. And then inside of that HTML, because we have that link tag, any class that corresponds to any Bootstrap class is going to provide us with styles that Bootstrap is supplying us with. However, the only issue that we're facing right now is inside of our Nuxt application, there actually isn't any HTML file. So how in the world are we going to get this link tag connected to our Nuxt application? So that's what we're going to be doing inside of this video. We're going to figure out how we can get this link tag connected to basically every single component and page in our app. Now, because we want to have this as a global style, so any single component as well as any single page in our application has access to these Bootstrap classes, what we can very simply do is actually plug it in inside of the nuxt.config.ts file. So this is just a place where we can configure our Nuxt application. And we can configure it in many, many, many different ways. But the way that we want to configure it right now is very simply add this link tag to almost every single component that we have. And that's exactly what we are going to do. So let's go over here. And what we're going to do is specify meta. This is just basically metadata that we're going to be specifying. And then right in here, we're going to specify a link. Now, this is going to be an array because we can have multiple links throughout our app. We can have this link. We can have other links if we want. Now, over here, we're going to provide an object. And then right in here, we're going to specify the rel. So right over here, this is this portion right over here. So we're going to specify that this is going to be a style sheet. So let's go here. We're going to say rel style sheet. And then what we're going to do is specify the href. So this is this component of the link tag. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. Let's go ahead and grab that like so. And then we're going to do href. And we're going to go ahead and add that href. So let's just go ahead and save that. And that right there is all it is that we need in order to get Bootstrap working with our application. So anytime we use a Bootstrap class, we actually should see those styles in our app. Now, in order to test this out, what I recommend doing, anytime you make any sort of change in the config, I recommend just closing your application, closing your development server by doing Control-C, and then running it again. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say hello. So I'm going to say hello over here. And once I do that and I go back to my Knux application, just waiting for it to load, I should see a blank page with hello. Let me zoom in here. There we go. We see it. I'm like 500% zoomed in. So right here, we see it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this with a class called container. So this is going to be a default Bootstrap class that I am going to add in here. And what it should do is essentially provide some margin and wrap this somewhere more in the middle. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And there you go. You can kind of see it. Now, you might not be able to see it that much because it's really zoomed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of it for now. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Hopefully, you can kind of see the hello over here. And I'm going to go ahead and add that container again. And you can see here that we do indeed get it. You can see that there's a little bit of a margin here, and it is working a-okay. So I hope that is clear, and that is how we are going to connect these global style sheets inside of the knux.config.ts. In this video, what we're going to do is build out our landing page. So let's remember exactly how our landing page looked like. So we had the nav bar, then we had this H1 header that just says welcome to Restaurantly, which is our application. And then we had a button or a link that will allow us to navigate to the list of top 50 restaurants. So very, very simple landing page. So let's actually go ahead and begin with the nav bar. Now, the nav bar would be a relatively complex and cumbersome thing to build ourselves. But we are actually going to utilize Bootstrap for this, and you're going to see how much easier it is going to be. So let's actually go ahead and, like usual, what we're going to do is we're going to create a component folder for this. So let's go over here. We're going to say components. And then over here, we're going to say nav.view. And let me go ahead and rename that to nav.view. So over here, we're going to house our component. We're going to have our template tags like so. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Bootstrap right over here, and then we're going to go to the components section. Inside of the components section, we're going to click on navbar. Once we click on navbar, you're going to see this navbar right over here. And this is actually the one that we are going to be utilizing for our navbar. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to click copy to clipboard to just get all of this code. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste it right over here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this container. And over here, I'm just going to say hello, get rid of that as well. And then I'm going to render that nav bar. So I'm going to go ahead and render that nav. So let's go over here. And as you can see, we have our wonderful nav bar. Now, of course, there's quite a bit of things that we need to change. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to change the color of this. I don't want it to be light. I would rather it be dark. So to do that, what we're going to do here is we're in the nav tag right over here. You can see there's a bunch of classes. We're going to specifically focus on these classes right over here. We're going to change this from navbar light to navbar dark, and from BG light to BG dark. That's pretty much all we need to do to get it nice and dark. Now over here, there's a bunch of different elements that we don't need. For example, this button here, we can completely get rid of it. Over here, let's go ahead and use this anchor tag, and we're going to keep this as home, but this should redirect us to slash. Right over here, this should redirect us to restaurants. So we're going to say slash restaurants here. So over here, it's going to be slash restaurants like so. And then over here, I think we can remove this whole li. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this li. And let's get rid of this form entirely as well. So now you should have a navbar that looks a little something like this. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to add one more style in order to move this bar right over here all the way to the left. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is I am going to go right over here to this UL that's housing these LIs. And I am going to call this margin L auto. So margin left auto. Now, I don't believe that's an actual tag inside of Bootstrap. So what we're going to do here is we're going to manually say margin left and then auto. So what this is going to do is just going to move it to the right as much as possible. So we're going to go ahead and save that, and there we go. So you can see now we have our nav bar, and when we click on these specific links, you can see it actually redirects us to /restaurant. So if I go here, it might be a little bit too small for you guys to see, but I just copied it to the clipboard. This is what it redirected me to. And then when I click on like navbar or home, then it's gonna redirect me. Well, actually over here with the navbar, we gotta change that to /. And honestly, let's go ahead and change this to restaurantly. Keep in mind, restaurant is kind of a tough word to spell, so make sure that you're spelling it correctly, especially on these right over here. So make sure that you spell that correctly. So let's go over here, and now if I click on this, you can see maybe very faintly that it's going to redirect us to the home page. So that's pretty much it. So now we got our nav bar. Now what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create a div, and inside of this div I'm going to create a container. I'm going to style this container manually as well. So I'm going to say container, and then over here I'm going to say this is going to have a text align of center, and I believe that should be really it. Then right over here we're going to say h1. We're just going to simply say welcome to restaurantly, like so. So there we go. We have our nice header. Obviously not the prettiest application in the world, but whatever. We're here to learn, not to build beautiful applications. So let's give it a margin top of around 5 rems. I like that a lot. And then right over here, let's also add another anchor tag that's going to take us to restaurants. Keep in mind, again, try your best to spell this correctly. This is a difficult word to spell. Restaurants. So restaurants with an S. Then over here, go to restaurants or whatever. Like so. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the landing page. Now over here, we can click on it. We get redirected to /restaurants. However, of course, the page is staying exactly the same. So now what I want to do is I want to have the ability to have multiple pages in my Nuxt application. We're going to explore exactly how we can do that in the next video. We created our home page, but now what I want to do is add the ability to navigate across pages. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now we are on the home page, and this is the current path we are at. However, when I click on restaurants, as you can see, the path changes to /restaurants, but right here we are not presented with a brand new page. Of course, now what I want to do is if we go to different paths, I want to show different pages, different UI elements that accord with that path. So why is it that no matter where we go, we're only showing this right over here, this landing page inside of the app.view file? Well, this is intentional. So if we utilize the app.view, it's going to treat our Nuxt application as just one page application, a single paged application. And no matter what path we go to, this is the HTML that we are going to render. So what we need to do is we actually need to utilize a different format if we want to have different pages, multiple pages with multiple HTML structures. So what is that path? Well, let's actually look at a diagram in order to understand this. So in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is first completely remove our app.view file. We don't want to use that anymore because we want to have multiple pages. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a pages directory, and it has to be called pages, and it also has to be all lowercase. I know the P here is capital case, but it has to be all lowercase. Now, inside of this pages directory, we're going to have multiple view files similar to the app.view, as well as any components that we have. Now, over here, let's say we create a restaurant.view file. Now, any view file inside of this pages directory is going to be treated very, very in a special manner. I know that English wasn't probably great, but let me explain exactly what I mean here. So we have this restaurants.view file, and what ends up happening is when we end up going to localhost 3000/restaurants, which is the name of the file, it is going to take this template right over here, the template inside of this view file, and render that. Now, let's say we create a file called hello.view inside of this pages directory. Then if we go to localhost/hello, then it's going to render the template in this file. Now, you might be asking, well, what do we do in the case where we just want to render something on localhost 3000 with no path? Well, in this case, what we're going to do is utilize index. So we're going to call our file index. And by default, what that's going to be is just a regular slash like so. So in order to essentially duplicate the app.view, but with this pages structure, what we can do here is create a pages directory. And then in here, we're going to create an index.view file. I cannot believe that keeps happening. Index.view like so. And then we can just grab everything inside of this app.view file and just paste that in there. And now what we need to do is delete the app.view file. So let's go ahead and remove that. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and now refresh, and I'm going to go to localhost 3000, and right away you can see that we have our app. Now, something interesting happens when I click on restaurants, and you may have gotten a quick glimpse of this. So when I click on restaurants, now we're getting a 404 page, and that's because now that we're using this pages structure, well, we need to have a restaurants.view file in there to render some HTML. Before, when we had that app.view, we were just going to render that everywhere regardless of what it was. But now we need a restaurants.view file in order to render the correct HTML template. So this is exactly how we are going to start creating multiple pages throughout our application. And this is so much easier than configuring it ourselves with Vue. This is just kind of done automatically for us. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and create a restaurants.view file in here. So I'm going to say restaurants.view. Mind the name. The name is very, very important because we are going to be navigating to restaurants right over here. So let's remember that we're navigating to restaurants. So the name over here should be exactly the same as this. Now, right over here, let's create a template. Let's create a div. And then let's also grab this nav bar. Let's paste that nav bar in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have an H1 saying, hello, this is the restaurants. Restaurants. Restaurants is always such a tricky word to spell. Okay, so now let's go back over here. I'll do a quick refresh. Now when I click on restaurants, you can see now we get redirected to this page with this HTML template. In this video, what we're going to do is go ahead and build out the restaurants page. Now let's remember exactly what this is going to look like. We have the nav bar, but we're also going to have this table right over here that's going to show the top 50 restaurants. Now, building this from scratch, building out the HTML as well as the CSS is going to be relatively cumbersome, boring, and it's not really going to be Nuxt related. So just for the HTML and CSS, what we're going to do is just copy the component that builds out this table. But anything related to Vue and JavaScript and Nuxt, we are going to do from scratch. So let's actually go ahead and do this. Now, in order to do this, what I need you to understand is this is going to be made up of two different components. So we have the table as a whole, and then within each table, we have these rows, and this row is going to be a component as well. So let's go ahead and go over here to our components directory, and I'm actually going to create a restaurant component directory right over here. Now in here, I'm going to create a table.vue file like so. Now attached to this video, you should be able to copy and paste the boilerplate template for both the table as well as the row. So I'm going to go ahead over here and I'll attach both of them in the video so you don't have to go search around. But you can see here we get this nice template. So let's go ahead and copy that in. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So this is for the table. So we got this div. We have this h1, and then right over here, we have the table container. And then in here, we have both table columns. So as you can see here, we have two columns. And then over here, we have, well, two divs that are going to house our rows. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then over here, I'm also going to create a row.vue file. Now I'm going to go back. Again, I'll have this linked for you guys. Just go ahead and copy this. Again, just the HTML as well as some CSS, so we don't waste time doing this ourselves. All right, there we go. So you can see now we got this row. We have an H4 that's indicating the rank. And then over here, we have the anchor tag that indicates a thing, the actual restaurant. Now this is hard-coded, but obviously later on, we're not going to hard-code this. We are going to make it dynamic. So now what I want to do is I actually want to go to this table and just render one restaurant row. So remember how to do that. You go over here. This is the directory where the row lives. So it's going to be restaurant row is the component that we want to render. So restaurant, and again, keep in mind the spelling, restaurant row. Very difficult word to spell. And now what we're going to do is inside of here, we're going to get rid of this H4. We're going to create a div. We're going to wrap this in a container. And then in here, we're going to say restaurant like so. And then we're going to say table just to render the table. So let's go over here and let's do a quick refresh. And there you go. You can see we have our wonderful table. So now what do we want to do? Well, now, of course, what we want to do is, I think, let's iterate over the array of restaurants and render a row for each particular restaurant. So I think that is the best thing to do at the moment. So that actually begs the question, well, where are we going to get that data from? So where are we going to get this restaurant data? Well, similarly to the row as well as the table file, I actually have some hard-coded data that I'll also link in the attached to this video as well. So I'm going to go to it manually, but again, you guys are not going to have to do that. So this is just going to be a data.json file that's going to have a bunch of different data about restaurants. So I'm going to go here. I'm just going to grab all that. I'm going to grab every single one and copy that. And then over here, right in the root directory, I'm going to create a data.json file, and I'm going to paste that data in. Again, this is just hard-coded data. Typically, data would come from a server. We'll talk about how we can make HTTP requests to servers a little bit later. But there we go. This is what we have thus far. So each object has an ID. It has a rank. It also has the name of the restaurant, some content, which is lorem ipsum, which is consistent throughout every single one. the revenue, the number of stores they have, as well as an image. So this is the data that we have. So now what I want to do is inside of this table, I want to essentially iterate over that data, and then for each data, I want to render a restaurant row. So let's actually go ahead and do that. But in order to do this, what I want to do here, and let's actually take a look. What we want to do here is we want to render the first 25 in this column and then the next 25 in this column. So we need to somehow split this because the data is just one large array. So I actually have a suggestion. Let's just go over here. Let's say script setup. Let's get rid of all this. It's just the boilerplate that I always get. Script setup lang is equal to TypeScript because of course we are going to be using TypeScript. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new constant and I'm going to call this restaurants organized. That's what I'm going to call it. And this is going to be an object. I'm going to say first, and this is going to be, and now what we're going to do is we're going to grab those restaurant data. So I'm going to say import restaurants from, and I'm going to say from at, just so we can go to the root directory, and then from data.json. So this is going to give us our restaurants. And I'm going to say that this is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and create a new array and destructure out everything in that array. And then I'm going to splice from 0 to 25. So this should give us the first 25 elements and attach it to this first object right over here. And then we're going to say maybe second. And then over here, we're going to say something like restaurants. And then over here, we're going to say dot splice. We're going to say start from 25. And I want the next 25 like so. And this should give us the first 25 as well as the second 25. So this is good. This is really good. Now, of course, what we can do is actually iterate over them in both of these columns. Now, you could argue that we could also make these columns components as well and then iterate over them. But we'll just leave it as is for now. So let's go over here. We're going to say v4. And what I'm going to say is v4. And I'm going to say for the restaurant. And then I'm going to say in restaurant organized dot first. And then, of course, we need to supply this with a key. So I'm going to say key is going to be equal to restaurant.id. Because remember, this has an ID. Restaurant.id like so. Let's go ahead and save that. And that should pretty much be it. This should allow us to render multiple different restaurants. And there we go. Well, not multiple different restaurants, but for each iteration, we're going to render a restaurant. Okay, so that's step number 1. Now let's go ahead over here and let's do the exact same thing. Now over here, what we're going to do is we're going to say restaurant.second. And there we go. So this is looking good. Now, of course, now what we need to do is, well, quite a bit of things. There's a lot that we actually need to do. So the first thing that we need to do, of course, is start accepting props. So we don't, hard code this data. We want to show more dynamic data. That's step number 1. Step number 2 would be to show this header right over here. So this would be another thing that we would want to show. And then the other thing that we are missing is the highlighting. So you can see here, over here we have this gray highlighting, then we have this white highlighting, then this gray highlighting, then this white highlighting. So this is what we have. And then obviously over here, we don't have that at the moment. So this is something that we actually need to work on. So let's do that in the next video. Let us go ahead and start implementing some of the things I discussed in the last video. The first thing that I want to do is I want to start passing some of the restaurant data as props to the row component. So right now, remember, everything is hard-coded. It's always 1. It's always McDonald's. But as you can see here, we have the rank. We also have the name for every single object inside of this JSON file. So what I want to do, ideally, of course, is to pass that data in from the table to the restaurant. Now, let's remember that this right over here has quite a bit of data, and the restaurant only needs to know these two things right over here. So instead of passing the whole thing, I'm just going to pass these two things, the rank as well as the name. So let's go ahead and do that. So right over here, I'm going to say something like name, and this is going to be equal to restaurant. Again, keep in mind the spelling, very, very tricky. And then over here, restaurant.name. And then we also want the rank. So I'm going to say that's going to be equal to restaurant.rank like so. Okay, I think that is pretty good. So now what we can do, and we can of course do the exact same thing for the other one, like so. And now what we can do is we can go over here. We can actually accept those props inside of the script. So I'm going to go ahead and create a script. Get rid of this junk. I'm going to say setup. I'm going to say the lang is equal to TypeScript. So lang is equal to TypeScript. And then I'm going to say const props. And I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to define props. And then over here, we are going to define our props, of course. Now we're going to define our props with TypeScript. So let's create an interface. So say interface. We can just say here row props like so. So let's remember what we have here. So we're going to have a rank that is going to be a number. We're also going to have a name that is going to be a string. So now let's go over here. And then right over here, let's create those triangle brackets and paste that in there. And now we should have access to both the rank as well as the string right over here. So now what we can do is we can just say rank, and let's just to see if it works. Let's just refresh, and there we go. Now you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 all the way to 25, and then all over here from 26 to 25. So that's good. Now let's go ahead and change the name. So let's just say name and refresh. For some reason it's not hot reloading, and there we go. So this is looking pretty darn good to me. One other thing that we're going to want to do is right over here inside of the href, this is going to be taking us to /restaurants/ the name of the restaurant. So that's that's important to note. So let's actually go ahead and implement that right now. So let's go right over here, and we're going to make this dynamic. Let's make this template literals like so. So over here, we're going to say, this is going to be /restaurants, and then slash, and then whatever that name of the restaurant is. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that we need. So now if I refresh and let's say click on Starbucks, I get redirected to /restaurant/Starbucks. Obviously, we're getting a 404 page, but we'll worry about that later. Okay, so that's pretty much, let's refresh this. So that's pretty much all it is that we need over here. So the next thing I want to work on is the styling. So maybe have some of the grayness right over here as well as some of the white. So one thing that we can do is very simply just look at the rank. And if the rank is, let's say, an odd number, we're going to show gray. If the rank is not an odd number, we're going to show just pure white. So that's pretty much all it is that we are going to do. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is at this row right over here, I'm just going to add a dynamic style. So I'm going to say if the rank modulo, so if the rank modulo 2, so if the rank modulo 2 is not equal to 0, so if it's not equal to 0, meaning that this is an odd number, then what I want to do is I want to add a background color. So I'm going to put this in a this curly braces right over here. I'm going to say background color of RGBA. And we could also add a class, but let's just do this dynamically. And over here, we're going to say something like so. And then we're going to give it 0.15 of opacity. Now else, what we're going to do is just return nothing. We're going to keep it white. So now let's go over here, and there we go. Now you can see right away that it is looking a-okay. Now this actually might not be the best idea, because now you can see we're getting like this weird checkers pattern, and I don't like that per se. So maybe instead of actually using the rank, what I'm going to do is use the index, so that over here we're just going to start with 0, and therefore over here is going to be 0, over here is going to be 0. Therefore, this is always going to be the exact same color, which is exactly what we have right over here. So in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is actually pass the index down. So we're going to need to grab the index from here. So we're going to say index like so. And we're going to pass it down. We're going to say index is equal to index. And then over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say index is equal to index. So we're going to change this up a little bit. So over here, we're going to accept the index as a number. And then over here, we're going to say index modulo 2 is equal to 0. And if that's the case, then we want to do that. And there we go. So now we get this this nice looking pattern that we have. Okay, so that's almost it. The last thing that we need to do is add this header right over here. So what I'm thinking of doing is actually introducing that into the row itself, because it's kind of like a row as well. However, obviously it's styled a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that this row is going to accept another prop, and this prop is going to be called the row type. So I'm going to say here row type, and this is going to be a string that is going to either be a header, or it's going to be whatever. And actually, maybe a better thing is just say is header, and this is going to be a boolean. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say div, and this too will have a class of row. And I'm only going to render this div if, and then only if it is a header. So I'm going to say is header. Now over here, we're going to have a else. So else, we're going to render this like so. And then right over here, what we're going to do is we are going to enter. We're going to have an h4. We're going to give this a class of header. And this is just going to say rank. And then over here, we're going to have another h4. We're going to give this a class of header as well. And this is going to say chain. Okay. And now what we need to do is to go back to the table. And then inside of the table, right above each row, we're going to render one extra restaurant row. So I'm just going to copy that. This is, again, a tough word to spell. And all I'm going to pass for props is header. And then is header is going to be equal to true, like so. Just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste that in there for both of them. And there we go. So now you can see that we have this header right over here. Now, one thing that we also should do in this case is we should make these optional, these props optional, because we're not passing the props for every single one. As you can see here, for this prop, what we're doing is we're not passing in the name and the rank, or nor are we passing in the index. So what we should do again is just make these optional, and we can do that by very simply just adding a question mark, saying that all these things are optional and you don't have to pass them in. Okay, so that's pretty much it, and that will build out our page. So this was relatively involved, and maybe you guys learned a little more Vue, but in the Nuxt standpoint, it was pretty stale. So from now on, we're actually going to be learning quite a bit of new Nux concepts. And specifically what we're going to start working on is navigation. And specifically, again, what we're going to be working on is navigation to a specific page like so. So let's figure out exactly how we can do that. All right, everybody. Now what we want to do is create these dynamic pages. So when I click on, let's say, Wendy's, for example, it's going to redirect me, and let me zoom in here. It's going to redirect me to /restaurants/Wendy's. Now, as you can see here, we're getting a 404 page. But of course, now over here, what I want to render is some Wendy's content. If I refresh and then I go over here to, let's say, KFC, again, I get the same exact thing. So you can see the issue that we are facing right now. So how are we going to do this? Now, this is going to present two different problems. So right now, this is what we have. But now what we want to do is we want to actually append to the /restaurants other paths like so. So /Wendy's, /McDonald's, /whatever. So how are we going to add multiple paths inside of our application through this file structure? The second thing is that these paths are going to be dynamic because they could be McDonald's, they could be Wendy's, they could be whatever. So we can't really hard code them inside of our file. So let's first talk about exactly how we can have multiple paths inside of our application. So to do this, we need to look at our folder structure. So right now we have this pages directory, and inside of here we have this restaurants view file that is going to correspond to localhost 3000/restaurants. Now we're actually going to have to change this in order to have something like /restaurants/whatever. In order to do this, what we're going to do is instead of having a file, we're going to have a restaurants directory. And then right in here, we're going to have an index.js. And then what's going to happen here is it's going to be localhost 3000/restaurants and then /. Remember, index is absolutely nothing. It's going to be /. And now this restaurants, where is it coming from? It's coming from the folder right over here. So the folder name. Now what we're going to do is if we add another file, so let's say a mcdonalds.view file, then what we end up getting is /restaurants, which is the folder name, and then /McDonald's. So over here, we basically kind of achieved what we want to achieve right over here when we click on, let's say, McDonald's, for instance. Okay. And now if you want, of course, what we can do is we can add another file like Wendy's. We can do localhost 3000/restaurants/Wendy's, and that should take us to Wendy's. Now, obviously, this is not ideal. Adding a file for every single restaurant is not great, mainly because we're going to have a million files and because this data could be coming from a database and it could be dynamic. So we might not know exactly what is in there. So the thing is, the file structure, the HTML structure for whether it was Wendy's or McDonald's is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is going to be the data that we present, but the structure is exactly the same. So what we need to have is some sort of dynamic file that catches everything after /restaurants, no matter what it is. So whatever is after /restaurants, whether it's McDonald's or Wendy's or Camera or Diet Coke, we want to catch that and then render that generic HTML template. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to call our file brackets, these square brackets, and then over here we're going to say name, and then right over here what that is going to correspond to is /restaurants, the directory, and then /whatever. Whatever is in here, it doesn't even matter. So you can say McDonald's, you can say whatever, it's going to render whatever is in this file. So the magic here is the brackets. So these brackets right over here, these square brackets, are going to specify just a dynamic name. Now inside of the brackets, you can call this whatever you want. This thing right over here is going to become a variable that is going to be assigned to whatever you called it inside of the bracket. So I called it name, but you could call it ID, you could call it monkeys, you can call it whatever it is that you want. But again, it's the square brackets that does this magic. So let's actually go ahead and implement this. It should be a relatively simple implementation. So over here, I am going to go to the pages directory. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a restaurants directory. Again, keep in mind the spelling. It could be a tricky thing to spell. Now in here, I'm going to create an index.view file. I'm going to go ahead and grab everything in here and just paste that in there, because this and this are exactly the same. Because this right here is in the root directory, it's just going to be /restaurants. This one is going to be /restaurants because it's in the restaurants directory. And then index obviously is not going to append anything. So let's go over here. Let's get rid of this because we do not need it. And just to prove to you that everything still works a-okay, I should be able to refresh this. And I might have to restart the whole server. Let's go here. Let's just restart the whole server. Sometimes when we make changes like that, we do have to restart the whole server, or maybe this wasn't even saved. That also could have been an option. But give it a few seconds, and once I refresh, there we go. As you can see, it's there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to say square bracket, and then in here I'm going to say name. Again, I can call this whatever it is that I want, but this is going to be the variable name, essentially, when I want to extract it inside of the script tags. And then right over here, I am going to say template, div, and I'm just going to say this is the restaurant data. Let's go ahead and save that. And now, if I click on Burger King, you should see this is the restaurant data. We always get this random error right over here. I think this is just a Nux internal error that they're going to have to fix. So I don't think this is our fault. This is just something that Nux has to fix. So over here, if I go to Arby's, you can see we get Arby's. If I go over here, I go to Culver. You can see where no matter where we go, we are getting that one page. So now what we want to do is we actually want to extract that name. And then once we extract that name, what we want to do is find all of the data over here and then render like the image, the store, the revenue, etc. So let's do that in the next section. In this video, what we're going to do is learn exactly how we can extract the name inside of our HTML. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a script tag, mark it as setup, and then we're going to say lang is equal to TypeScript, because we're going to utilize JavaScript to extract that name. So inside of Nux, there's a bunch of different things that we have called composables. And composables are essentially places where we can store global state. Now, of course, composables also have functions within them, which allows us to update that state as well. We'll talk about composables a little bit later, but typically composables start with the word use. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of different composables. We got use meta, use async data, use whatever, use router, use route, etc., etc., etc. Now what we're going to be utilizing is use route. So over here, we're going to say const route is equal to use route, and we're going to go ahead and invoke it like a function. Now what this is going to do is assign a bunch of different information about the route that we're currently inside of this variable. And now what we can actually do is from this variable, we can extract the path that we have over here. So we can actually do that very simply by saying const name is equal to route dot params, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the path parameter. And then specifically, what path parameter are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the name path parameter. Now, TypeScript is giving us a little bit of an issue right now, TypeScript issue, and this is just because we called this name. What we can actually do is just do import nothing from hashtag name. and that issue should, or hashtag app, and that issue should go away. Essentially what's happening is name is being declared somewhere in our application, and it's thinking that we're kind of duplicating that name. Now by adding this import, it's going to know that this is going to be scoped to this page, and there is no other declaration of name in here. So that's just a little simple trick that we can do. Okay, so now that we got the name, what we can actually do is go ahead and render it. So instead of rendering this, let's go here and let's just render the name itself. So let's go here, and if you zoom in a little bit, there you go. You can see we get McDonald's. And if I go back to restaurants, what's going on here? What's going on here? I'm not really sure. Let me just quickly restart my server. Let's restart that. Let's see. I still have my index file, and I think that should be fine. Sometimes Nux does some funky stuff. Let's see here. And there we go. Now it's looking good. And now if I click on Dunkin', you can see I also get Dunkin'. Let's just click on one more. Let's click on, zoom out a little bit. Let's click on Jimmy John Gourmet Sandwiches. We get Jimmy John Gourmet Sandwiches. Okay, so this is looking really, really good. So now what I want to do is I actually want to grab that name, because this name is going to be unique. I want to grab that name, find the restaurant that has that name, get that object, and then render some HTML. So in order to do this, the first thing that we need to do is we need to, of course, get the restaurants. So let's actually change this import statement from that generic statement to import restaurants from, and then we're going to say at data like so. Again, this is going to go to the root directory and grab the data.json. And then what we're going to say here is const restaurant, just the restaurant itself. That's going to be equal to restaurants dot find. And then over here, I'm just going to say R. And then I'm going to say R dot name is equal to the name over here. So that's just going to be the restaurant itself. So now let's go ahead and try to render that JSON instead. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you can see we're getting a bunch of different data. So now we can actually populate that inside of HTML. Now I actually have a bunch of HTML and CSS hard-coded or copied and pasted right in here. So that's exactly what I'm going to use. I'm going to link this boilerplate HTML attached to this video, so do not worry, just so we don't have to do all the CSS stuff. But you can see here we just have, you know, an image. For the image, we got the name, we have the revenue, we got the store, etc. So if I were to save this, we get something that looks a little like this. Now, of course, we're going to have to actually now use this restaurant data to actually render this stuff dynamically. So let's go here. Let's just say restaurant.name. Over here, we can change this to restaurant.revenue. Number of stores. This is going to be restaurants. Let's go to the data.json. I forgot what it was called. Number of stores. Probably should have guessed that. Number of stores. And if we save that, you can see this one sucks. This one's way too big. Let's pick a better one. Let's go to Taco Bell. You see we get Taco Bell. We have this. We have that. Now all we need is the content. So let's go over here. And let's change that to restaurant.content. Now we should have the content. Last thing we need is the image. So over here, this should be restaurant.image. So what I called it, image URL is what I called it. Image URL. Okay, so there we go. And that's pretty much it. So now if we go back, we go to Restaurantly, we can navigate here, and then we can navigate. Maybe I want to get more information about In-N-Out. And now you can see right away, we're getting all this new cool information. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now, one potential issue that we might run into is that what if right over here, let's just go back to something a little simpler. Let's go to McDonald's, for instance. So let's say, so right now, this is what we have right now, right? But what if somebody put a path that corresponds to a name or a restaurant that actually doesn't exist inside of our data? So something like slash hello world, for example. How would this work? Because right now, if we were to render this, what ends up happening is it goes inside of this file, because this file is going to catch that. This is a completely valid path for this file. So if I were to actually go over here and paste that in, you can see now we're actually going to get an error. So we're getting some sort of error. And if we go over here and we inspect that error, we go to our console. Maybe if I can do a quick refresh here. We're getting an error. We're just unable to render something. That's just what's happening. You can see it's just continuously spinning. Maybe if we go to this console here, it will show us exactly what the error is. If not, you guys probably just get the point. We have some sort of error. Right here, we have an error. And obviously, this isn't a great user experience. So this is the error right here. So it's saying, well, restaurant is null, and we're trying to access image URL from it. Obviously, that's going to throw an error. So this isn't a good user experience. So instead, what we want to do is maybe just say, hey, sorry, we cannot find this restaurant. So let's think about how we can do that in the next video. The last thing that I want to handle inside of this section is what if we go to a page that doesn't exist inside of our application. So let's say instead of going to slash restaurants, I go to slash hello world like so. We get thrown this really nice but Nuxt specific 404 page. And over here you can see it takes us to, well, it gives us the ability to go back over here. Now, I actually really like this page. However, of course, in a real application, we're going to need to change this, not into something that is specific to Nuxt. We're going to have to change it to something that is specific to our application. Now, our 404 page is not going to look as nice as this, but again, it's going to be tailored for our app, which is something we want to do. Essentially, what I'm going to teach you guys is how we can create our own custom 404 pages. And it's actually really, really easy. All you have to do is go over here to the pages directory, and then inside of the root directory, what you're going to do is you're going to create a 404.view file. So anytime we hit a 404, it's going to render this HTML right over here. So I'm actually going to go to the index file, and I'm just going to grab everything right in here, paste that right there, and then I'm going to say here something like page not found, and I'm going to say just go back, not go to restaurants, just go back like so. So that's pretty much all it is that we need to show. And now, if I were to do a refresh, you can see now we have our own little custom 404 page. Obviously, it's not as pretty. You guys can make it prettier, but it's custom to our own application. And now you can see we can go back to, let's go back to the home page, not to the restaurants. So let's go here. Let's go to a 404 page like so. So page not found, go back. Now we're over here again.